Once that's open, we want to pull pictures inside here. There's a couple ways we can do it. We can go to File and Open, and then find our pictures and just double click on it. Let's see here. So let's double click on that. This is my puppy. And so we have that open. Okay? And that's inside Photoshop now. That's one way. Another way to open one is you can just go to your folder and that's wrong folder. Let's find the right folder. And you can just click and drag it in there. So you can move it over here and you can just click and drag it in. Either way. Okay, those are two ways you can open images in there. So once that image is open, you'll see that it's what we call docked at the top. You see that we have these little palettes over here, and the palettes move around. These little windows move around, and they're called palettes. So we have these palettes here, and then we have our image here. Now, the image is what we call docked at the top, so that means it's kind of attached at the top. To undock it, you just click on that and move it. That way you have more options to move your image around. Then also we may want to not have a picture that size. So we can change the look of our picture by using Control- or Control+ on the keyboard. The way that Photoshop was meant to run is to have your left hand, if you're right-handed, on the keyboard to do keystrokes and your right hand on the mouse to move stuff around. That's the way it was meant to work. So I'm going to show you keystrokes a lot of the time. This is keystrokes. Control+ makes it bigger. Control- makes it smaller. If I do Control+ and make it big like this, I can also hold the space bar down and a hand comes up as the cursor now. You see the hand? That means I can move this image around and see my puppy's cute face there, or his ball that he ripped to shreds, or whatever. You can move it around. Okay? Once you hit the space bar, the cursor turns into a hand, and you can move your image around when it's bigger than the frame that it's sitting in. Okay? So I have that image there now. I always want on the work area here, the workspace, I want to go to Window at the top here, and I want to make sure that two windows are open, my Layers window and my History window. Layers window and History window. Layers window and History window must be open. This is what the Layers menu looks like, and this is what the History or window looks like, not menu. This is the History palette and the Layers palette or window. Either one, okay? I need those to be open. There can be other ones open too, but those are the two I need to be open. And here's why. Because we can do some stuff to this picture, and I can go back in my History menu and undo things just by looking inside there. So every time we pull up a picture in Photoshop, the very first thing that we should do is make it the size we want it, but then the first adjustment we make to any picture is we crop it. Okay? We crop it. This bar over here is called the toolbar. And you can move it anywhere. It's always on the left. You can move it anywhere you want. And you'll see that there are a bunch of tools in here. You're going to learn what many of them are by the time the semester ends. But you'll see that there are little arrows in the corner. Every one that has an arrow in the corner means there's a drop-down menu. If you hover over the tool, it tells you what it is. This is the Move tool, Rectangular Marquee tool, Lasso tool, Quick Selection tool, Crop tool, Eyedropper. So if you just hover over them, it tells you what it is. But if you right-click on them, you'll see that there are other menus behind those menus. Some have a whole bunch, and some only have a little bit. Okay, but they have different menus behind them. If there's a little arrow in the corner, it tells you there's a drop-down menu. So right now we want to go to our Crop tool. That's the fifth one down here, and you see it right here. And it's in two L brackets, like in the old days when we cropped with two L brackets that we held together and we laid it over pictures. So a lot of the icons on Photoshop you'll see are after real things, like this is a Band-Aid, this is an eyedropper, a brush, a lasso rope. So it kind of mimics real life with some of the icons that the tools use. So we're going to click on the crop tool. Now you'll see that what happens is we get this dashed line around our picture with little boxes in the corner and on the edge. Those are called handles. And now we can just grab a handle and move it to crop it. Cropping is probably one of the very most important things you can do to an image. Even a tiny crop can make a big difference. For me, what's really distracting is this top part in this picture. So I'm going to get that out. So I'm going to crop that out. Okay? So I'm going to crop the legs of that chair and that desk out and maybe move this over a little. I could still get part of his ball that he ripped in there. Now, to apply any crop, you can either hit this arrow, that means commit it, or you can just hit enter. Either one will commit that. Okay? So now I have that cropped. Now, if you look at the history palette here, you'll see that I have the open here. This tells you the actions that I've done. I've opened it, and there it is. Then I've cropped it. And you can see what a difference that makes when I do that, right? So I've now concentrated more on the dog and less on what's around him, even though he still has the messy stuff around him that he wrecked. So that's why we have the history window open to do that. Also, if we want to go back one step in Photoshop, we go back by using Control-Z. That takes us back one step that we just did. It undoes whatever the last step we did was. If we want to go back more than one step, we use Control-Alt-Z. Control-Alt-Z. Going back one step is Control-Z. Going back more than one step is Control-Alt-Z and hitting it several times. It'll take us back. So if I had done like 4 or 5 steps, I could keep going back and back and back to that. So Control-Z for one step, Control-Alt-Z for more than one step. Or go back on the history palette a step, or go back on the history palette several steps. Now, once we have that done, we've cropped the image. Now, and remember, cropping as something as small as 1 millimeter can make a huge difference in a picture. Taking out one tiny little thing can make a huge difference in a picture. Or moving something in, even, a millimeter or two can really make the composition work. So that's what you want to do. Pay attention to when you crop. Take time to do it till it looks exactly right. So now, the next thing we want to do is on our layers palette, here, separate them, you'll see that it has this layer, the background layer, and it shows my dog laying here, just like the picture. At the bottom, there are different things you're going to learn about. The one we care about is the one in the middle that looks like a circle that's half black and half white, kind of like a yin-yang symbol, but without the curves. If you hover over it, it says create a new fill or adjustment layer. That's what we want to do. We want to create a new adjustment layer. So if I click on that, you're going to see this huge menu pop up, and you're going to learn what a bunch of these do. We care right now about levels. I'm going to click on levels, and you'll see now that it made a layer up on top here, and that there's some levels here on the properties menu here. You'll see that this thing here is called a histogram. And a histogram shows you all of the distribution of the highlight areas, the light areas, the dark areas, which are the shadow areas, and the midtones, which are the ones in the middle. It shows you the distribution of all of those throughout your image. So you can see in this picture, it's very well distributed. Sometimes when you open a picture, it will not be so well distributed. Let me see if I can find you one that is going to need some work. So let's see if we open this one. So if I open this one and I go into here, and I come in and I move this and I go and I create levels here, you're going to see that it's going to show me a really different histogram because this picture is much darker with only a light spot in it, right? So if you look at the histogram, the way this is distributed, the white arrow at the bottom shows you the highlights, this side. The gray one shows you the midtones, and the black one shows you the shadows. So you can see that this has a bunch of dark areas, hardly any midtones, and one little white area here, right? So you can see that this one is very odd. If I take this and I move this slider over, you're going to see the whole image get really, really light, okay? Because this is a lot of pixels that aren't being used, okay? So if I take that slider and I just move it over to where it touches the histogram, I can lighten up that picture dramatically. So if we show you the before and after, now you see that this made its own layer. To the left of the layers are eyeballs. The eyeballs are to view it or not. You can turn it on or off so you don't see that layer. So if I click this eyeball off, you'll see that it takes away all of the adjustments we just did. But when I turn it on, it shows me the adjustments we did in that layer. Okay? And in this particular case, that makes it a lot better when we move that histogram over to touch the edge of it. Because these are basically empty pixels over here. Now, not all of them will need that adjustment. Just like we just showed you, the one here did not need any adjustments. Because when we look at the, when we look at the histogram here, we see that it's all evenly distributed. So we don't need to move any of those arrows, those sliders, because it's also evenly distributed. But that's always the first thing we want to check on an image because it identifies where the problem areas might be. All right, so now we have the levels. The next thing we want to do in any picture is we want to go back here to the little yin-yang symbol, and we want to do brightness and contrast. Brightness and contrast. Okay, brightness and contrast. So when I click on that, you'll now see that I have another layer in my layers palette. I have the background one, I have my levels, and now I have my brightness and contrast. And if you look at the brightness and contrast properties here, it has two sliders, brightness and contrast. So to me, this is a little bit light, so I want to darken this a little bit. Okay? And maybe I want to take the contrast down because I think it's got a little bit too much contrast. I don't want to darken it too much, but it was just a little bit bright. Take the contrast down. Most people take it up because they think it looks cool when it's way whacked out like that. Watch when you look at your picture that you adjust it to make it better. Our aim is always to make everything look better. So we come back here to our layers palette and I turn that layer on and off. You can see that's what I did in the brightness and contrast. I took down the whites a little bit. And then if you go to the next one, you can see that we did nothing because we didn't need to do anything on that levels one. But those are the layers that we want to do on every picture. The first thing we want to do is crop it. Then we want to go to levels. And then we want to do brightness and contrast on every single picture that we work on. We want to do both of those, all three of those. Now, once we have it about how we want it, so let's say this is where we want it and how we want it. So we want to save this picture. Right now it says image 6116.jpg. That's what came out of the camera. So I want to go up to File, Save As. Do not do Save. Do not do File, Save, because it will save it to the C drive and be lost. You want to go File, Save As. So I go File, Save As. Now, I want to decide where I want to put it. Okay, so I want to put this in my S drive. So I'm going to move this up to find the S drive, the student share drive, photo, and then you'll have a folder with your name. Right now I have to find mine because I have access to all yours. And I want to put it in the composition folder. Now you notice here that it did the default to Photoshop, the .psd, right? I don't want that. What do I want to save it as? TIFF. So I'm going to use the drop-down menu here. The very last one at the bottom is a TIFF. So I'm going to click on TIFF. Now I'm going to change the name. I can highlight the whole name here, and I'm going to change it to Toby. Okay? So I now say save, because I've changed the name. Photoshop will automatically add the TIFF onto it when we save it. So I'm going to say save, and then always say OK on the TIFF options. Don't click anything, just say OK. So now he's saved, and now you'll notice that the name here says Toby.tiff. So let's close out of that. And if we go back to my S drive, and we go and we find that file, and there's Toby. So if I open that again, I can right click and go open with Adobe Photoshop CC. So I have it there. You'll notice that all the layers are still here that we worked on. I can still come in and change them. So if I want to come into this layer, I can come in and still change it. So I can say, I'm going to brighten it up a little. I think that was a little bit dark, so I'm going to brighten it up a little bit more instead of where I had it. You can adjust it later, and you can go File, Save. Because once you've named it and designated where it goes, you can just save it again, and it'll save it on that spot. Okay? So, but now I want to save it again as a JPEG, because all the pictures that I turn in are going to have to be JPEGs. So I'm going to find that file again. I'm going to open it with Photoshop, and here it is, and I'm going to save it as a JPEG. So I'm going to go over here to File, Save As. I wanted to save it in the same spot, but I'm just going to do the click down menu here. I don't change the name. Just click this down to JPEG, and it automatically made the extension of JPEG on there. And then I say save. And you want to keep this as a large file. You want to move the, you don't want small files when you save your JPEGs. You always want them to be large, and you say OK. So now when I go into my S drive and that folder, you see I have Toby as a JPEG file, and I have him as a TIFF file. The difference being here that don't want to do that. Close out. The difference being that one file is way smaller than the other. If I hover over this one, you'll see it's 37.1 megabytes. If I hover over this one, you see that it's 2.9 megabytes, a substantially smaller file. Now, if I open this with Photoshop, and let's open the JPEG with Photoshop and show you that when I open it, there are no layers. Because every time you save as a JPEG, it flattens all the layers and you can no longer get back to them. So right now, I have no layers. Well, let's say I want that, because the default is to save as a PSD file, let me show you what happens when I save as a PSD file, which is the default sometimes when you're working on it. So I save it as that. I'm going to close out and show you what it does when we do that. So you see here that it saved it as a PSD file, but we can't see anything on it, right? Because it just has PS and PSD on it and a blue box, and that's it. If I open it with Photoshop, I can see it, and the layers would be there if I started with that. So now I have the picture that we adjusted, and we still have all the layers. I have the JPEG saved as a JPEG, so it's a smaller file, and that's what I would put on my PowerPoint. Okay, let's try one more to practice. So let's open a picture here. So let's open one of these pictures. So I have this picture here. Okay, the first thing I want to do is crop it, right? And it remembers that the last thing I did was crop, so it already has the crop thing on there. So if we move the crop thing, so I'm going to say I'm going to get some of that down, maybe move it over a little bit, something like that, and hit enter. So then the next thing I do on the picture is what? Next thing I do is levels. So I'm going to click here on the adjustment layer, and I'm going to go to a levels layer. Now I'm going to look at the histogram here, and you'll see that I have empty pixels here. So if I take those pixels, if I take this slider and move it over, watch how much it lightens that picture. I only want it to touch the edge of the histogram. And if I turn that layer's eyeball on and off, I can see what a difference I made in that picture, right? Just by adjusting the levels. Now, what's the next thing I do? Good. Brightness and contrast. Always do levels first, then brightness and contrast. So now I'm going to come up and I'm going to brighten it up even more. And maybe take the contrast down a bit because it's a little bit contrasty. Still get some detail in there. And then now what do I do once I like it? File, save as, and what do I save it as? TIFF. So I'm going to come down to the TIFF, and I'm going to save it as rocksculpture.tiff. Okay? And I say OK. So I'm all done with that, and let's say now I want to turn it in, and I go back to the rock sculpture here. That's lightened, and I open it with Photoshop again, and you'll see that I have all the layers still here. They're all still here. And let's say I decide that I want to maybe darken it a little bit, because maybe it's too light. So I still have that selected, so I'll come down and darken it a bit. And then I go File, and I can save it, because it's already been saved as a TIFF, and then I want to save it now to put it on my PowerPoint, and so I'm going to save it as JPEG. I'm going to go to JPEG, and I'm going to say Save. Now it's going to tell me it already exists because I had one already in there. If I say no, I want to change it. So all I have to do is like put Rock Sculpture A on it, and then I can save it, and it won't replace that one. It'll make a new one in there. So if we come back to the originals, you'll see that I have Rock Sculpture A here that shows how this is the original. Here's the TIFF, and then here's the JPEG. Okay? So that's what you want to do on every picture. Now I wanted to show you really quickly in Blackboard that under useful information and fun stuff, right under the assignment tab, is the file format handout. So it talks about all the different file extensions, and you can look that over. It even talks about RAW, PNG, GIF files. You guys know GIF files because there are a lot of video stuff, and EPS files. We only really care about TIFF and JPEG. TIFF and JPEG. That's the ones we're going to use. But you also see that there are in here some other links for some of the tutorials that I give on Photoshop, and you can access them at any time.